Hello and welcome to the GI podcast. I am your co-host, Sid Haig.
And I am Tobin Rossico.
And we are here today with Dr. Daria Ho, who is a lecturer in history specializing in transnational China and East Asia at the University of Waterloo. So thanks for coming down with us.
Yes, that's me. I'm your guest today, and I'm privileged and honored to be here.
Yeah, no, fabulous. So usually how we start these podcasts is we like to open with a standard question of kind of what is your earliest experience with games? It can be any type of game, board games, card games, video games, any type of thing.
Okay, so I still get carded if I buy beer, for example. So people think I'm like the younger than I actually am, but actually I was solidly like raised in the 80s. Okay, so like first experience of gaming, believe it or not, was just a card game, bridge.
Okay, yeah.
Like so, my dad played bridge. And introduced at home, but then I got into we got our very first computer. It was those old dot matrix, those dot matrix things. Space Invaders. Do you remember Space Invaders?
Yeah.
And Zork.
Okay.
Okay. So text based, choosing the text based game, Zork and Space Invaders. I mean, that was my entry point into the whole world of virtualizing, sort of another kind of existence, right? Yeah. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you kind of keep up with trends of gaming throughout through the decades of just seeing how things have been developing and stuff like that?
Yes, I absolutely hopped on to the trending things that were happening. I longed for my own Nintendo when the first Nintendo came out. I was envious of all the people who had Game Boys when I didn't have one.
Those Game Boys were so
But
cool.
I had a Nintendo. I played the old Contra. I mean, those old games, they were hard.
Yeah,
I mean, there was no loading or everything that you just had. Ninja Gaiden, the original Ninja Gaiden on Nintendo. That was a hard game. Those in 8-bit realm. So and I proceeded from that to Super Nintendo and all kinds of things, and also I spilled over into board games. I got very interested in tabletop board games.
Interesting.
Just as a result, of just buying Dungeons and Dragons at a garage sale, and then trying to run it.
Everybody's entry drug.
Yeah, suddenly I realized there was a whole world of things you could do, and I started thinking about not just enjoying them as pleasure, but as actually appreciating the design, the aesthetics of what you're doing.
Yeah. Would you say that there's any in particular board game that you really truly appreciate for the design of it? If you can think of any specific one, don't feel too pressured if you can. There's
an interesting one called Samurai. And I don't think the GI has Samurai.
I don't think we do, no.
So I have, so Samurai is this game. It's made by a German, sort of a German game maker. And it's very simple. You got nobles, you got monks, and you got farm. It's basically and you have to use the samurai to sort of strategically position them so that they can capture rice fields. Because that's what it's all about. It's all about the rice fields in Japan. And I just taught a samurai class last term, in the winter,
okay,
and everything and of course, I'm always bringing props to class, artifacts. I'm bringing samurai swords to class. I even taught them battle tactics.
Wow.
I was shouting at them in Japanese, and telling them to go, and moving formation. But the game is kind of aesthetically sleek and beautiful. Very simple rules, but kind of crafted very well. So it has a nice look to it, and a nice feel because it's a comfortable game to play. So
cool.
Yeah, so I it's not as complicated as the Shogun game that's out there in the GI on the library. That one is really really complicated, right?
Yeah.
Same thing there.
Yeah,
so.
that also kind of it's interesting when you're saying that you're bringing a lot of props into your classroom, especially when you're teaching history, because I think that's probably the easiest way for people to actually not only engage with the history but also be able to remember it much more clearly. It's actually seeing these very physically tangible things brought in.
Yeah, so I guess my overriding thing is whenever I teach, and as I think all educators think about this to some extent, is I want to teach the kind of class I wish I would have taken when I was in college, university, right? And we've all had the boring lecturers who pulled the same lecture that they wrote 30 years ago on like old typewriter script.
Yeah.
We've all taken they just pull it out of the old file, just read it, like not even looking at you, like just reading it from the paper, and then that's it.
Yeah.
Like, we've all had that, and that's not what I want to deliver.
Yeah.
So I want to deliver something where like it's not predictable. Like yes, they know what they're going to learn in terms of the subject matter. But what we're going to be discussing on a particular day can take many different directions, because that's how life is. You know, like there's contingency, there's choice, and fundamentally, games simplify those choices into a kind of structure. And I've always been fascinated with games, even though I don't work directly in the research of games. And I'm a total history geek. Like I was trained as a historian, but believe it or not, I started out as a mechanical engineer. That was my first major in college. I was a mechanical engineer, but then I fell in love with history, and I was like, it's all about learning about contingency and how the what ifs, like things could have happened very differently, and everything that. And then when you look at that, like games have a structure, but life. You can give life structure in some sense, like in some sense, but when I try to sort of do that, then the students can come not just remembering the historical content better because they kind of learned it in a kind of a manner that was sort of more engaging, but they also form they're not just learning history; they're learning how to be people. In the world, so teamwork is very important. Like I always emphasize in classes, if it's not a lecture class where I'm not lecturing at them, I want them to be talking to each other.
Right. Yeah. The kind of collaborative learning and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that's so much of what we receive. All these rubrics from the Center for Center for the studying methods of pedagogy and teaching excellence and things like that. And those are all wonderful and useful, but when it comes down to it, you're faced with a group of 30 students, and you're quaking at your knees. That's how I was when I first taught my first class. I was literally lucky that there was a high podium there, because my knees were shaking. I was standing. There's 35 students there, and then I'm nervous as heck, but then it's like you got to all those methods fly out the window at that moment, which is you got to just look people in the eye and communicate. And engage them. And ideally, you want them to laugh, because humor is so important. It's so understudied and so important for learning, because people associate emotional memories with learning.
Especially since, with your research in particular, the periods of history that sometimes you're looking at, they can be a lot of, rough material that they're looking at, or very, hard to engage with, especially emotionally. So it's you kind of want to still give them that ability to, still have fun while they're learning about even, difficult subject matters, so...
Yeah, I've taught courses ranging from the history of global disease, for example. That's not a subject that
Definitely.
You want to take right before lunch.
We just lived through that as well. So.
Yeah, right. Like the global disease, and then you have you have a history of Chinese Americans and Canadians, but you have to talk about racism and discrimination and xenophobia, and these are difficult subjects, right? And you're talking about the Korean War. You're talking about massacres. You're talking about human rights abuses and things like that. Prison camps. Everything like that. So how do you do that, in a responsible way? But still, and then when you say you want to be humorous, you're not making light of the subject. You're essentially allowing the subject to sort of shed a little bit of light into the person's life, so that you can reach them somehow through pop culture, essentially. But the one thing I have to say about being a researcher and professor is your students always stay the same age, but you always get older. So my pop culture references keep getting more and more out of date as it goes on. So I was like, I don't even know what you kids are listening to nowadays. Are you listening to Justin Bieber? You're growing up listening to Justin Bieber, Miley Cyrus, and I don't know, Carly Rae Jepsen.
10 years ago.
Yeah, or something. I was like, and then it's increasingly out of date, right? So I'm always trying to smuggle in 1950s, 1960s, 1980s, 70s music. And I was just like, yeah, we have to refer to historical lessons from this classic song, classic rock, everything. So musical education is something I really, really do a lot, just to get the humor element in, and also to really engage with that, because that's a lost sort of cultural world that they're not exposed to. People are atomized nowadays, and so they don't grow up watching the same movies, right? They're all streaming. They stream their own thing, whatever they want to watch. So they don't have that experience that maybe we had. When we went to the movie theater together with our friends. We went to the mall and we hung out. The mall was actually a place to hang out and everything, and play actual interactive games. arcade games, like an old game. We used to stand there and play Street Fighter and actually just like be yelling at the person next to you. Like, no, you can't do that, right? But that experience doesn't happen in the streaming world now, because people just sit at their own computer alone in a room.
Yeah.
So how do you get that? So I smuggle in music. I do music all the time, and I always redo the lyrics as the music's playing. I redo the lyrics according to whatever like history I'm teaching, because it's totally appropriate, right?
Oh, that's a lot of fun.
Do you have examples of perhaps like you said you brought in samurai as kind of like a cultural thing to demonstrate that? Do you play games in your class? Because I feel like so many board games are rooted in history. Like the origins of role-playing games come from wargaming, and that's all about kind of reliving or reconfiguring those kind of events. So do you bring that in? You set up a big table and say, all right, let's like redo, some Korean War battle, and let's figure out kind of the perceptions of each side? Or is it just kind of like, here's things we're going to show you? Like, do you engage with actual play in the classroom?
Yes, I try, and I'm always looking for ways to improve on this, because there's only a limited time in the class. I wish I could bring in more. For example, there are for example, I would love to teach a class one day called history through video games, looking at the cultural mechanisms that are being conveyed when people actually play. Things like Age of Empires or there's Age of Wonders, and when it's actually using historical things like civilization, for example, and using those, and then we're going through and looking at those. However, because there's always limited time, I have to first educate them on the history. I have brought in the sort of games, actual examples of actual games, like a board game or a one sort of time in a previous samurai class I taught back in the United States, because that's where I'm from.
Okay.
So I had brought in Nobunaga's Ambition, which is a long-running, historical simulation series of samurai. And the famous samurai warlord Oda Nobunaga and his conquest of Japan, right? I brought that in and had students kind of fiddle with it for a bit and play with it. But we had such limited time. You got 1 hour, and you say things. So I've tried to bring it in as much as I can, but I always encourage them to play. And the thing I do as a result, because I can't actually bring a board game takes time, so it's teaching the rules and everything, setting up. So because I can't actually do it, even though I want to, I end up just creating scenarios that can be live action role plays, where they're not actually going to be using a board or a digital device to play a game. They're essentially living and role playing and simulating the actual history. And I did that most as prevalently in my Korean War class, where I ran basically for almost 2/3 of the term. I ran what was called the DMZ project, where I didn't tell the students what I was doing, but one day they showed up and they saw there was this fake barbed wire right in the middle of the room, and suddenly they were told, you're sitting on that side and you can't cross anymore. You can't cross anymore. You're North Korea and that's South Korea. And now you're really actually fighting the propaganda element of the Korean War. Wow. Essentially like that. So we didn't have pitched battles in the room. Yeah. But literally from that day, they were like, no, these are your teammates. And that's your nation. You're not, and so you have to learn how to embody it. And there were rules, there were structures, essentially like that. But we created a whole hierarchy of officers. But they took that ball and ran with it. So literally you gamify the class. And I said, it's competitive. I said, some team is going to win. If you're North Korea or South Korea, you've got to be whichever one is more convincing, like me and the TA, for example, in this class, whichever one we're gonna sort of sit down and evaluate your work and just think about how convincing are you actually doing it, and so you're gonna have a winner, and there's gonna be prizes. Essentially, I gave out prizes, essentially for the winner. And when you make it competitive, students want to win, we just the human nature, right? you want to win. Yeah. So it's and I don't think of the exercise as a joke, because it ran literally for weeks, literally you're talking for just 8 weeks. You got people coming in and they're literally dressing up and putting on Kim Il-sung little pins and stuff they bought from online, right. And they're waving flags. And then I found out later that because I surprised them, so they wanted to shock me. my student basically went to Home Depot with his dad, and they bought wood, and he made a coffin, like a handmade wooden coffin
Okay.
for himself. You can see this in the documentary film. Like,
Okay.
and maybe you can put the link to it in the
we definitely will.
podcast thing. But at the end of the film, like he literally buried himself in a state funeral in the coffin. So I came to the classroom and I saw this big wooden coffin that was sitting right in the middle of the room, and he was in it, like and then he was carried in by all his people. The North Koreans carried in. The great leader of North Korea died in 1994. That was the historical death of Kim Il Sung.
Yeah.
And he did it without telling me he was going to do it.
That's amazing.
I mean, it's just incredible. So I was just like, I gave them something, but
Yeah.
they really responded in kind.
Yeah. It's just like the theater, the performance,
Yeah.
the drama of it all. No, that's incredible. I think a part of the discussion that of this kind of like documentary and this experience was just like also the propaganda nature that came out of like your students' experience. So can you speak on to like that of just like how they started, getting this propaganda machine and like going and how that kind of played out?
Absolutely. The thing, the reason I made that documentary film in the end was because they were doing such just wonderful, like, creative stuff. And I was really seeing my students take creative control. And that's something that doesn't happen, sadly, not often enough at the university level. Like most classes, it's pretty top down. You know, the instructor tells you what you're supposed to learn and how you're going to learn it. And and you're being evaluated. But like literally, they were doing such wonderful work that like I decided I have to capture this. So I started videoing them with their permission. I got them all to sign like like waivers of permission. You're going to be filmed, and everything, and I'm going to make this through my little shoestring budget into like into a full length feature film that stars you, like stars them as the stars. And they completely they were like they started the class not knowing each other. They're coming from like 20 different majors. Literally, I actually sat down and counted. There are 20 different majors. Everything that they didn't know each other. Essentially, like that and students they weren't talking to each other like at the beginning of the class. But then when I formed them into teams and I said you got to elect your own officers. And then they started having these democratic discussions, like, okay, like, no, who's going to be the great leader, And so I have this whole little structure I made. You've got to elect six officers, and then and a great leader. There's a propaganda officer who basically creates the art, leads the parades, sings the songs, right? But you have a research coordinator because you have somebody who has to actually research the history of the Korean War and North and South Korean history to actually be able to responsibly do it, right? You can't just make stuff up, right? So they're using slogans and everything that they're learning Korean in the process.
Wow.
Actually, there's a news director who, I was like, if you want to, you can create a social media account. Like, so they created like sort of a social media account where they put fake news, their own fake news, like their this is what's happening in like North Korea, South Korea, and everything. And it was all yes, there's the potential. You always take a risk when you do that kind of thing. But the propaganda was not hurtful. Like in the end, it was always competitive, but it was in good fun. It was understood that there were certain boundaries you don't cross. They kind of naturally did that, and I didn't have to do too much policing. They had a guard captain as one of the officers who every class has to march along the DMZ, like literally that fake barbed wire. And we started putting like little green army men, like nice, soldiers, plastics like GI soldiers on there and everything. And eventually, one student actually, as propaganda, literally to prove the superiority of the of South Korea, like brought in a little remote controlled helicopter and was flying around the classroom, like around the DMZ to say like we have the technology because we're like South Korea is allied with the United States, right? And then there was like but how do you police this, right? I tried to make it like so there was a KCIA or NKCIA officer who's supposed to be the person who reports to me. They elect one officer who's going to be watching what everyone's doing, how they're working, reporting on what people are meeting, essentially. And it's not sinister. It's like I'm just reporting that these guys, they staged a quote unquote protest, right? Sort of like on campus, and that they filmed like my students brought balloons to class, and they put propaganda images on the balloons. And then they released them, sort of like as like to show like that their nation was rising above the other one or something. And so but the artwork that they did floored me. I gave them a basic budget. I was like, okay, I'm a university lecturer. I'm not rich. Okay, that. So I gave them an art budget. And it was like, yeah, you can take this to Party City or whatever it is, like, that back in the States. And they were like, and then, yeah, they bought balloons, or they bought and they made their own, like flags, for example, like, everything. And they started taping them up. And every single time they showed up to class, because we have to vacate the class at the end of it, every time we leave the class, somebody would take them down, because the next class would complain if we are leaving,
artifacts,
propaganda, yeah, stuff like that. Like, so somebody would always help me set up, and they were volunteers.
Yeah.
And they would be taping up their own flags and their posters, like down with South Korea, and kind of thing. And it was so wonderful to see that, like they were putting in literally more time into this class. And then one of them said that she was like a biology major, but she said she was joyfully spending more time in my Korean War class, like working on the stuff for it, than she was doing her major requirements. I was like, wow. I was like, maybe you should just switch your major. But the propaganda was so wonderful. Like, those who could play music played music.
Wow.
They would bring a guitar to class and sing a propaganda song, and I gave them the time to do that. Like, at the beginning of every class, the first 15 to 20 minutes of the class, they've got dedicated propaganda time with switches between North and South Korea.
Dedicated propaganda time.
Yeah, one week it's North Korea has the floor, and the next week South Korea has the floor. And so they'll be like, last week you brought oranges to class and you insulted us because you said we don't have enough food over here. Well, we've brought rice from we've got plentiful rice. And would you like some? Like, you're experiencing this famine like in North Korea. Would you like our South Korean rice? And they're eating this rice, and you can smell it from the other side of the room. They're eating this fragrant rice, like they bought from Panda Express or something like that, right? So they were spending their own money, they were spending their own time and strategizing, and they wanted me to smile, like they wanted me to be, it's sort of like I didn't. This was totally unscripted, and I believe that's important. Agency is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so interesting, because when I'm recalling the time I was in history class, and this is just from like a high school and a grade school perspective, the one classes I can easily recall is when we had some sort of like role playing or gamified element. Like, I remember I think it was like a social studies class or a history class in grade 7, where we were trying to role play the early interactions between the European fur traders and the indigenous peoples here in Canada. And that stuff I can just clearly recall because there was something fun and enjoyable about it that I can easily recall. So it's kind of interesting of how these kind of experiences also probably make it easier for people to actually remember the actual like lived history of this time.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember the old game Oregon Trail.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Right. So when I was in elementary school, your reward for finishing an assignment early was you get extra minutes to play Oregon Trail, on this computer that was in the classroom, and we played the heck out of that thing, literally, tried every single possible thing that you could do in that game, and learning the history of a frontier, learning the history of interactions between things, and it came down to some of my classmates, they just wanted to shoot squirrels, for example. They just wanted to take Oregon Trail and just get in.
There's the little hunting
thing,
right?
So you can die from dysentery later.
But then there's other thing, what do you do? You want to ford a river? Do you ford the river and everything? Do you float your wagon?
Mm-hmm.
Do you drag it around and everything that? And then there could be a chance of disaster, if you do that. But those choices narrowed down the possibilities, right? I think that was probably my first window onto the fact that if you want to teach a subject effectively, because you want to just tell people, hey, you should learn about the Oregon Trail, you should learn about the Lewis and Clark, and the westward exploration. But they're not gonna; those names mean nothing to them, right? Mm-hmm. You essentialize it down into certain choices that they make that have consequences, and suddenly, it makes sense. And they want to read about Sacagawea, and they want to read about Lewis and Clark, and then they want to read about, Simon Fraser and the Canadian exploration of the Canadian West, right? And suddenly it makes sense to them because they made some choices. I feel like nowadays, people are blessed nowadays that they can create their own avatars, that they can create their own things, they can customize them, right? And their customization is so way advanced now compared to what it was, back in the day. Back in the day, you were you had to do it all in your mind. If you're doing D&D, the old tabletop D&D, it's all in your head, right? With the character that you're playing. But now, live action role plays and cosplays and all kinds of things, you can totally customize who you want to express yourself as and how you want to live. And that's an element that I feel like I want to learn more because I want to take advantage of that. I want to find a way to do that in the classroom. So like, and I haven't found many ways to do it, except I bring in artifacts, for example. Like I'll literally lecture for an entire class in my samurai class wearing a samurai helmet, and that thing is heavy. Yeah. Okay, so you'll know how heavy it is until you lecture for an hour and 20 minutes, hold it with that on your head, and your neck kind of hurts like afterwards. You're like, oh, you have to hold your neck very straight, right?
Yep.
So like I've done that, and then I'll put the helmet on the students' heads and say like, and does anybody want to volunteer to wear this for the next hour? Like, and just have this helmet on your head, so even when you're looking down at your computer, you have this heavy steel helmet, or replica kabuto basically on your head. And everything like that, and then essentially, and then I'll dress them up. I'll be like, who wants to wear the samurai robe, for example, and then we have the two swords and walk around. And then essentially, so you find a way that they have to make certain choices when they enter the room. For example, if they're dressed like a samurai, they can't just turn any which way they want. The swords get in the way, right? Because they've got these long swords at their belt, hooked at their belt. So, and then they have to be conscious of how they turn, how they sit, and everything. And that's like, that's the point. Yeah. Samurai were very conscious about their comportment, about their historical and social role, and they had to act the part of the samurai. Performativity is key. You have to, if you're going to be a person, it could be a samurai, it could be it could be a Chinese medieval emperor, for example, like that. You want to perform in that court, you've got to perform the pageantry, the part, and everything like that, and it's got to be. You've got to believe it. Morale, like you actually have to embody that role. But isn't that what you subconsciously do when you actually pick up any sort of game, tabletop, board game, card game, essentially like that? You're playing a role, aren't you? Which is maybe in bridge, in the card game bridge, you're sort of bluffing, for example. Right. You make a bluff on everything that. That's a role, essentially. You're claiming that you don't have these cards when you actually do, right? For example, like that. And you're tricking sort of people like that. And so there's a lot of things. And people say, oh, yeah, once you mention it, it makes sense. Yeah. That you're actually making these choices. But we do it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I want to come back to this idea of like student choice and giving them that kind of authority or agency in the classroom. It's one of my complaints with like the syllabus model. Is that students show up to a class, the syllabus is pre-written, they sit down, right? This is what you're going to be doing for the next 13 weeks or whatever, like, and you have no say in it. So when you design your syllabus, are you just kind of like, you already have, I assume, you have a roadmap of some kind with perhaps some exit ramps, but are you saying like, here I kind of expect them to kind of get a feel enough so that they can kind of give back to me, and then maybe we'll take this exit ramp if they need to? Or do you sit down and say, like, here's our learning objectives. How do you want to get there with me?
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating problem that I've always wrestled with, which is, I agree with you. I don't like having to dictate how, okay, for the next 26 meetings we're going to meet. Yeah. This is how it's going to go. Like, this is a game plan. But I've got to give enough structure, because a lot of them are coming in with no background whatsoever, especially in a history class. They're non-majors, for example. They're non-history majors. Even if they're history majors, I'm teaching like Asian history, like Japanese, Chinese, Korean, or like Southeast Asian, or history, or like, history of Chinese Americans and Canadians. Like, they've never seen that in public school. We heard nothing about that, right? So like, I have to talk about these topics. But then, so I literally have, every time we meet, I have a title and I have a topic that we're meeting, a certain number of pages that correspond to that theme. You're supposed to read this. And if you come to class, the value of this class derives largely from your engagement with the material. Yeah. If you come to class having read that material, we can have a profitable discussion. Right. But I'm not going to like repeat the material that was in that assigned reading, essentially for that day. So I don't show up with the prepared lecture notes. That's my compromise, which is I have a very prepared syllabus, very carefully calibrated, that it gives me those exit ramps, right, where I can kind of go off on a tangent. If I see students interested in that, I respond to their eye contact, like their body language. And if they look like they're really interested in like the history of chop suey and Chinese food in Canada, like I'll go more on that than I planned to originally, right? Like so, and then we had this fun like thing last week where literally like I was just trying to explain to them the origins of the General Tso's chicken, General Tso's chicken, like which you see in every Chinese American and Chinese Canadian like restaurant. But it's like, where the heck did that come from? Like, is that actually a historical dish? Is that actually authentic Chinese?
Is there
food?
a General Tso in real life? Right?
There was. And there historically was a General Tso, but he didn't create the dish.
Right.
It was created in the 1960s by a Taiwanese chef who created it, but he named it after General Tso. And it was rumored that General Tso had a pet chicken or something like that. So General Tso's chicken is like universally known. Everyone knows that semi-sweet, semi-tangy, like battered, fried, chicken. And you see it everywhere, but like they finally learned where it came from. And so I showed them a whole documentary on this. Like, and then they were like, wow, okay, like now we know. And it is authentic Chinese American food. It's not originally from China.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's just created by Chinese Americans in the context of the history of exclusion and the Canadian head tax and all the kinds of things where Chinese restaurants were the ways people survived during hard times because they couldn't find other jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started cooking up this thing they called chicken, this sort of like cashew chicken or General Tso's chicken, everything. And so it took off. You have to leave yourself that. And one of the things I tell people at the beginning, and sort of like to speak to your question, is you want to let students know from day one that the course will actually take a different form because of their participation.
Oh, that's cool.
They've got to know that because like when they come having that syllabus model and they just say, I'm just going to passively sit here and say nothing for the entire term because the professor's going to do everything for me. I'm just going to sit here and just be passive. I'm just telling them from day one that's not what's going to happen here, which is this is not that type of class, which is there are topics and readings assigned essentially, and there are assignments, and I have to grade you essentially because that's what's expected, at this level of teaching. But I said I want to adapt it to your interests. So I always assign as part of the syllabus, I assign them to be lead discussants, for example. They've got to bring their own questions to class and share them with the students ahead of time as lead discussants. You got to email the students ahead of time.
I love that model.
So I said I don't want to tell you what you should think about this reading. I want to know what you think or something that doesn't make sense to you.
Yeah.
You got to tell me, right? So, and then our entire discussion will revolve around those lead discussants' questions, not mine, not my questions. Even though I've done all the material and I read all the stuff, but I'll talk about what they want to, based on that. Like I said, there's always an element of risk when you do that because in the end, you might just get people who don't want to be engaged.
Yeah.
And what do you do in that case? You assign somebody as lead discussant, and then they don't provide any questions. They just sit there mute. Okay, so obviously they're not going to get a good grade for that participation element in the class. But I always have a workaround. I have a backup. Like on my handwritten notes, which is not on the syllabus, I always have like, if this doesn't work, show this little video clip and get them laughing. And suddenly they start talking to each other. And so you have a thing, and it's almost like when you're a faculty member, you are a scholar and a stand-up comedian at the same time. You're a stand-up performer. You've got to stand and deliver. Yeah. So I don't come to class with prepared notes for most of my classes, but I do have very clear expectations from the beginning. I laid out on page 1 of the syllabus, which is this class depends on your participation. It will change shape as it goes. And even I don't know what I'm going to say all the time. So I have 3 rules for the class on every front page of my syllabuses. Number 1 rule is no bullshit. Essentially, I said, I will not bullshit you, but I ask that you not bullshit me, right? It's number 1 rule. And number 2 is mutual respect. Mutual respect is the basis of our education here. Right. And number 3 is academic integrity, right? In the age of AI, it's especially, very important concern. But since I moved to Canada just last summer, I made a pledge to myself that during my first calendar year in Canada, I wouldn't put the word bullshit on the page 1 of the syllabus because I don't want to be the ugly American. So like the thing is, in America, I was put there, rule number 1, no bullshit, everything, that class pledge, essentially on page 1 of my syllabus, every single one of them. And then students would take that home, and then their parents would see that and say, well, how come there's the word bullshit written on the page 1 of the syllabus? So I did that back in the States, but I was like, I'm learning about Canada, and I think Canada is kind of supposed to be a polite society. Right? So like, so I said, I'm not going to. So I wrote no nonsense. I made the compromise. I wrote no nonsense, especially because I didn't want to offend any administrators in my first year here. But I think that starting my next term, like when I teaching.
Bring
When
it back.
my second year here teaching at UW, I'm just going to change it back to what it should be, which is no bullshit. We should call it what it is, right?
Yep.
And if I'm not going to bullshit them, if there's that candidness, then we can have a frank discussion about what do you want to do in the context of this class, right? And people, like, what do you bring to this class that can actually shape this conversation that we're having? And I hope, like I said, I'm varying degrees of success on this. Sometimes you reach people, sometimes you don't. But there are always students who come and tell me they appreciate that aspect, which is it isn't the top-down directed model of things that in fact, that the unexpected things that they come to class and they may end up learning that day that it was not even written on the syllabus. Something they learned that day or discussed in that day turns out to be more productive than what I originally planned, right? And the no bullshit rule applies to me too, which is I'm not going to kid myself and think I know everything. I'm not going to even pretend that I know everything.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's also just such an it's hard to do because especially when you're teaching history, there's so much rampant misinformation that people are just going to get completely wrong, and students may come in with preconceived notions of how things actually are. So have you ever are you starting to how do you approach people who are just coming in with absolutely wrong ideas, especially when you're talking about contentious issues like the rampant propaganda around North Korea? So how do you actually engage with those more difficult topics, especially in a setting like this?
Oh gosh, I've had students come in literally, and they were sort of what do you call them? They were like cold warriors. They were literally totally communism is evil.
Yeah.
The communism is evil, and the United States was always the good guy. And everything that, and it's only communists who make propaganda, right? Essentially, right? I had this one cold warrior there who was absolutely.
And this is in the States for context,
this was in
right?
the
Yeah,
States,
okay, yeah.
right?
I was like, I don't think you'd find many people like that.
Yeah, he was. I don't know.
Probably.
I'm trying to learn more, but I'm finding that Canada, there are a lot of interesting things happening here, everything that I've actually, to my dismay, I found actually Canadians driving around with Trump stickers on their cars.
Yeah.
I was like, I thought it was just an American thing. You can't even vote in American elections. You have the Trump bumper sticker on you. What the heck, right?
Yeah.
Trumpism and the whole the whole ideologues, demagogues type of thing. Yeah. But I had this guy in the class who constantly was his views were pretty reactionary. He was anti-communist. He had pejorative views of women, example like that. It was really problematic during the student. I could have handled it in a number of ways. But to speak to your question, you want to handle it in a way that's constructive for the class.
Right.
I'm not going to put him down for his personal views or try to disabuse him, essentially like that. Yes, I personally disagree fundamentally with that. View his intolerance of other possibilities. But essentially, what I tried to gently show, and we have sort of eventually he learned to respect that, is that there's a certain thing that you are engaging with this material, and you don't have to personally believe in the material, but you should give it due credence. Essentially, you should give it the proper consideration. It is historical material. This was produced by somebody who genuinely believed it. So in that vein, he actually turned out to be a really good student, because when he realized he doesn't have to agree with North Korea in order to embody North Korea, and as a revenge, I assigned him on the North Korean camp, essentially, because he was from
the
day
true
one.
immersive experience,
right? I didn't tell him which team they were going to be on. I just basically one day they showed up and I said, "You're over there," right? And he's like, "I have to play as a communist," right? But he actually rose to the role, because he understood that in the end. Yes, I don't have to agree with something or embody it myself, but I can respect it, that it exists. And I think I convinced him that all societies make propagandistic material, media. We're all trying to sell something. Even I, as a professor, am trying to sell something, right? I want to sell an education. So I want to convince people that they should actually take ownership of their education. Am I not trying with my music and with my bad cultural jokes
props
and and video shorts and all kinds of things like that, is showing up to class dressed as a Korean yangban or a Japanese samurai? So all these things, am I not using tactics to try to propagandistically in a kind of good way motivate them to dig deeper? right? And to dig deeper in themselves. And so, yes, you have to deal with that. You have to deal with racists. You have to deal with ideologues, people who go on a talking point, essentially like that. But I think most people at the university level, in the United States and in Canada, if you present them a reasonable argument that, look, for the purposes of this class, it's important that we maintain a respectful and peaceful sort of approach to these materials, and you can feel free to have your own opinions and disagree with all this stuff. You can even not like me. I said, I don't take it personally. You don't want to drop this class? You don't like my style? Okay. Like I played a 1960s song. You don't like 1960s music? Okay. Well, you're going to hear it anyway, like if you're in my class. Right. But some people don't like my style, right? But the thing is, some people hang around. They'll become repeat customers. They'll keep coming back because they know that they're going to get something different, a different flavor each time there. Isn't that what we expect when we play games? We expect that when I play the game the next time, it's not going to be exactly move for move the same that it was. Yeah. And I play, and you asked about sort of early gaming experiences. I grew up playing not chess, not Western chess, but Go. The game Go.
I'm glad we got here. I was going to ask about Go.
Yeah, it's and most people haven't heard of Go in the black and white stones, 19 by 19 board, everything. But they saw the film A Beautiful Mind, right? Like A Beautiful Mind, starring Russell Crowe as playing as John Nash, right? The economist John Nash, and they were playing in Princeton University. They're playing this Go thing.
I like that your fingers do the like
they play Go. Yeah, right. And then they were playing, and then at the end of it, he loses the game, right? And then he says, I had the first move and I played perfectly. So the game is flawed. Essentially, he throws the board, he knocks the board over, and everything scatters the stones, everything. But I was just like, so I'll show people that and say, there's a game called Go, and I grew up playing that. But Go is all about adaptivity, right? Whereas essentially, it is like the number of possible combinations of Go moves is like astronomical, right. Like in nature. It's like more like than there are atoms in the universe or something, or molecules in the universe or something. It's like the possibility is like on a 19 by 19 grid for different moves. So no game will ever be the same because the players are different, because even the same player will make different moves, and everything is variable. And so I basically use that philosophy to guide my philosophy of life when I'm raising my little children, or like when I'm whatever that, which is I have to be prepared to vary things, because I can't get everything to go in a set pattern. Mm-hmm. If that were true, if you could actually pattern your life and predict everything, it wouldn't be a life worth living, right? Because you leave no room for the romance, for the chance of things happening, accidents and contingencies, and it's just coincidences, things, right? So.
Let's shift from teaching, because that was fascinating for 40 minutes in. And I mean, we probably could wrap up the rest of the 20 minutes with it, but let's talk about your research. So could you tell us a bit about your documentary, Living History, and then we'll have some follow-ups about kind of digging into that?
Yes. So the because a lot of people nowadays are talking about digital humanities, and they're putting on things like digital mapping, like using Scalar and Omeka and to make web platforms, and that's wonderful because it makes us able to share like research with people, right? And it's wonderful. What I wanted to do with and why I was inspired to make a documentary film. Because it was my very first hand at ever trying to be a filmmaker, and believe me, it's really damn hard. It's very, very hard. It was way harder than I ever thought it would be, because I was literally schlepping like 40 pounds of equipment to the class, the video cameras, the tripods, everything, microphone, and to class like every time and setting up ahead of time. I was exhausted. I was like, after every class, I was exhausted. But like the fruits of my labor were aimed toward this idea that digital humanities shouldn't just be about creating digital content that people can passively look at on the web. I want to in the process, because I want this whole class to be digitized in this documentary film. I want to just digital video record it, and I will edit it and splice it and make it so the students are the stars. Mm-hmm. They're the stars of the show. In the process, that transformed their learning. They were responding and engaging with material in ways that were different because they were on camera. And at first they were nervous about being on camera, but later they realized, you know what, I am role-playing, aren't I? Right? So I'm already role-playing as a North Korean, so I shouldn't be self-conscious about wearing an armband and waving, the flags and, doing the sort of like, marching in a goose stepping or that around, like everything that, even though it's on camera, because I actually want people to see this,
Right.
because this shows like I'm actually really, really learning. And I'm doing it. They were so excited that, oh, you know what? I can show this to somebody else. I could show it to my parents, that are essentially actually whatever. I can actually, for once in my life, I can actually say, this is what I'm doing at college, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I'm not just reading some books. And
Yeah.
Not just Shakespeare and Jane
just,
Austen.
and it's all invisibly happening. And this is where all your money is going to pay for my tuition, right? Like they're saying, like, no, I'm engaged with something that is genuinely creative, right? And this is how I'm doing it. And like I said, like, a student even one student of mine even talked his dad into taking him to Home Depot to buy wood to make the coffin, right? Like everything that, and his dad actually installed the handles for the coffin so the North Koreans could actually carry it, right? Everything, because he's sort of good at carpentry. But then I think the documentary film was done as an act of service to this larger idea that when we do digital humanities, we're actually creating different experiences. We're not just taking lived experiences and then just replicating them and just posting them on like a static website or something like that, which is the thing was actually changing because we were trying to digitize it. And then they ended up making their own little mini propaganda videos because they saw I was videoing them. So they started videoing themselves in the dorm, for example. And they were they were videoing themselves in the dorm and splicing it together to make it look like they were actually protesting something. So they staged a sort of protest that I wasn't even aware of, and they filmed it, and then they showed it during their propaganda time in class. That we actually did this over the weekend, and then they had students asking like, "What class is that? Like, what the heck? Like, why are you guys walking around campus, like marching around campus, like saying like we were moved for democracy in South Korea and like, everything, and like people were actually asking. So that's what you want, which is you want people who are not even in the course to actually be able to see that something different is possible. And I think that spills over into, research too, because in a sense, this is an experiment. Mm-hmm. It's a social experiment. Mm-hmm. I don't know how it's going to go. Like, it could fall flat. It could, essentially, I have to be a mediator and sort of like I have to manage conflicts that could arise. But like, that's essentially what I do in my research, which is I'm researching smugglers and pirates. Like I do like Chinese maritime history. These are people who didn't want to be written about, Right. Like they don't want to leave records. They're smugglers, pirates, sailors, fishermen, and fisherwomen, and the women who ran like strong families. There were women pirates, for example. I'm researching these people, and I'm trying to write that historically, like, academically, just in published articles and things like that, and writing about that. But these were people who lived on the edge. Right, and they didn't want to be written about. So much of what they did actually goes unsung, right? Because sometimes they hurt people, sometimes they help people, but like essentially they weren't trying to be paragons of anything. They were just trying to be themselves. So like, and I'm researching and writing about how they affected these social communities. But I see that when you do that with students, which is that you get them mobilized when they're all wearing the same armband and they're responsibly researching the history so that they can actually learn to work as a team. Then I wanted to make sure to capture that. And it was very, very hard to make those choices. In the end, it's not the greatest film in the world. Like, the documentary film, it is what it is, right? It's an amateur experiment. I say as much on my YouTube. When I post on YouTube, I said, I'm just an amateur. I'm not a filmmaker, right? Yep. But I said I did it because, here it is, right? Mm-hmm. This is just a slice of what we did. And, I brought in Korean War veterans, sort of like to talk to the class. And then they had, students actually had this long running relationship with the veterans afterwards. And they didn't even know there were Korean War veterans in Rochester, New York, which is where I was, where I taught that class. They didn't know. They were like, the Korean War veterans still alive? Like, they're really old, and most of them are like 90, like 80, late 80s and the 90s years old. But like, they're around. And so, wow, I didn't even know, right? So like they can connect with this. And then the veterans appreciated that there were young people wanting to talk to them and learn the experiences. And they told my students, you now know more about the Korean War than even my families do, right? Even they don't just talk about their trauma and their problems and their experiences of the war with their own family members, their kin. But they'll talk about it with these students because the students genuinely want to learn. And so I think that just like those Chinese pirates that I research and write about, and pirates and warriors and fishers and traders, people don't have to occupy only one occupation in life. Students aren't just students. Like they're not just their professional students. They're actually there to make a new content, and it'll happen in the classroom, and I'll capture it there and put it in the documentary film. But presumably they'll do that in future avenues of life, right? They'll become movers, influencers. They'll start companies. They'll create software. They'll like make public art. For example, like that. And so if I see that, wow, I had a hand in just just nudging them toward that direction. And I think everybody here at GI wants to do that, right? Whether you're researching haptics or whether you're researching like social media or like role playing or indigenous culture, for example, you are essentially trying to nudge people toward questions that they normally wouldn't encounter, right?
Would you like to see, or do you think in the future there will be this shift away from just written, published, peer-reviewed scholarship to something that is more what you were doing in that class of like, hey, this is the research, you can see it, you can watch it, you can critique it, rather than just here's 5 pages of typed report?
Yeah, I think there's only a small minority of scholars who actually enjoy the academic model of the way things are actually doing, like the peer-reviewed publishing, where you basically work for years, like to publish a monograph, an academic book,
right,
that basically might be read only by 5 or 10 people in the world, right? Like who are actually in your field,
right.
For example, like it's not going to have a mass audience. And then there are peer-reviewed articles which you submit an article, and then it actually takes 2 years before you see it in print. So that means during that time you had this research, it was all written and done, but no one in this world saw it, right? I think that digital humanities allows us to share that material earlier. Unfortunately, it's not accorded the same respect that the print world is, because there's such a I guess institutional institutional structure that basically accords credit only to those things as that's what real scholarship is. It has to be published in a peer-reviewed journal or academic journal or something. And so just web publishing is not in most humanities fields that like history is not really considered real, scholarship. But I think everybody realizes that the field has to adapt, and that you could create, for example, as a serious work of scholarship, a little simulation game, and so I encountered examples of this where somebody literally made an entire game, which was a choose your own adventure game, based on the historical account of the 47 Ronin, for example, cool. In the samurai, sort of who avenged their master basically by murdering this person. What choices they made. So they actually put together a choose your own adventure game based on that. That was historically based. Now I consider that a work of scholarship. I want to do something like that in the future. I started learning Python, and I started learning whatever. I'm trying to just do some basic coding because I want to do something like that in the future. But I think that should be accorded some level of credit. But it isn't currently in the ways that universities are established. And I understand that there are reasons for this, but the field also has to change and adapt. Especially we live in the age of AI-generated art, and other kinds of digital tools. Everything that, and so publishing should change, just the same way publishing changed when the printing press was invented, when the typewriter was invented. Publishing really changed, right? From handwritten manuscripts, essentially that, to whatever, digital tools. So I'm really inspired by, I think, my colleagues here at the that I've met at the GI. Because a lot of them are working on exciting stuff, and I think they're publishing it in ways that isn't, it's not standard academic practice, just not peer-reviewed journals, but it's they're doing all kinds of creative things.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting, right? A lot of the people here are human-computer interaction scholars, and their scholarship model, I guess that's probably not the best term for it, is they don't even publish. They just go to conferences, because if they publish, like you said, the delay means that in that window things have changed so much that when it's published it's already obsolete. It's
so they want to share the latest findings. This is, I think, like this is one of the things too that people in clinical occupations are finding too, which is there's so many medical advances in trials and experiments, clinical trials, for example, where they actually haven't yet got the approval, to actually legally like allow a drug, but they're testing it, right? And they're having these results, and they want to share those results. Like it's just preliminary experiments. This is how discoveries are made, right? And how do you share that? They go to conferences. Yeah, they'll give a paper and present it, even though it's not yet finalized, right? And we should be able to do that because I think that this is going to change like the ways healthcare is practiced, the way farming is practiced. Like farmers can share best practices with each other that they're trying out. Oh yeah. Right. And they don't have to be like, this is 100-year-old established, like practice, essentially like that. Oh, I just found out that this works on these insects, for example.
Three other farmers have to agree that it's true, or the peer review farmer
the peer
model.
review process of being like, oh, it didn't work for me, so I don't
right. And I read this great book called it was called Bet the Farm. I don't know if you've heard of it because you're interested in that. So,
I am very interested.
It's called Beth. I think it's by Beth Hoffman or something like that. And her husband, they basically moved to a farm in Iowa. And they started a farm in Iowa, because they moved from the West Coast. They were like formerly Californians.
Oh my word!
And they moved to Iowa, in the United States, and they started this farm. And she writes candidly about all the struggles that they had. And one of the struggles they had was getting like useful information, essentially.
Yep.
Essentially, because farmers, a lot of times, new farmers, essentially, there's certain things they need to know and learn the hard way.
Yep.
And there could be a better way to transmit that information. So they started going to agricultural conferences.
Yeah,
and they started talking with the local farmers and trying out things and everything that. So I think you'd be fascinated by the book. Like, I'll track down the title and author and send that to you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's all I've got to say, if you're good, Tobin.
All right. So the last one I'll ask is, what do you think current curriculums or course offerings are lacking when it comes to China and Southeast Asia, offerings, I guess?
Yeah, I think that rather than viewing I think that for a long time there was something called area studies. Okay. Right, where every department is supposed to cover. There's a certain coverage they're supposed to have. Right. Oh, somebody's got to cover Europe. Somebody's modern Europe, and somebody's got to cover ancient and medieval, period. And somebody's got to, and then you always have French historians, and you have some U.S. historians, Canadian historians. Right. So you've got to have coverage, right? I think that just being a China scholar and being an East Asia sort of oriented person, when I'm teaching about East and Southeast Asia, I'm not just there. I think I view it as the need it serves isn't just to cover the area, somebody covers the Middle East,
just check
Middle
the box.
East. You're just checking the box, right? I feel like I always try to find a way that I'm contributing to the ways that people think about themselves as Canadians and as Americans, which is by actually learning about China. I actually always find a way to say, yes, here's the history of China, or here's the history of Japan. But how did Japan and China actually impact reshape Canada and the United States? Because you can't study the other without also learning to better comprehend yourself. And so rather than teaching it as the history of the other, here's all these foreign names and all these things you got to learn, I'm teaching a history of Tibet right now. Who's been to Tibet, right? None of my students have been they have not been to Tibet. But I tell them, I've been there. And here I'm teaching this class because this is the kind of course I would have wanted, right? For example, but I see it as feeling this need, which is, why did you come to this class? And the first question I ask them when I open my first lecture is, who are we? Why are we here, right? Which is, you have various reasons for being in this classroom. So you're presumably here not just because you want to learn about this faraway, exotic place that has nothing to do with your life. You presumably want in the process to actually discover something about yourself, don't you? So in the end, I think that Asian history speaks to this issue, which is the West has always been fascinated with Asia, but not really fundamentally understood it. And it's that lack of understanding about Asia and the essentialization of certain things, the stereotypes, whatever that, it shapes actually Western culture. And so I always find ways to do that. I do that through my Tibet class. I do that in my modern China class, which is, China, a century ago, people talked about China as poor and backward and essentially, but now look, people are talking about in the newspaper about how China is the next threat, the new Cold War, all this kind of thing, the big threat to Canada and the United States, to world peace. And I was just like, how things can change. But historically, always things have changed, right? So I said, like, I'm going to teach you a history that is dynamic and evolving. And your views of China nowadays are not the same views I had growing up, or I heard growing up. And just like they were not the same as my parents, who immigrated to the United States in the 1970s, right? Like they were growing up in the Cold War context. Right. So the world has shifted and moved on. But Canada and the United States have fundamentally been shaped by their preconceived notions and interactions and trade with Asia broadly. And we by exploring that history, we're actually learning in the process Canadian history, American history. That aspect of it, because I approach it in that way, I think it helps. It's like making a certain bite of food digestible. They're able to see it as like it's not something arcane and abstruse that I'm learning, just only applicable in this classroom. Actually, when I look out at broader Canadian society, and when I go to a Chinese restaurant, I eat General Zhou's chicken. I learned about the history of General Zhou, who actually General Zhuo Zongtang, basically, Zhuo Zongtang was a general who helped the Qing dynasty put down the Taiping Rebellion, right? In the mid 1800s, right? And I understand the cultural creation of it in Canada. So I have a deeper understanding of Canada. And that's how I want to approach it. I see Asia as providing that crucial window of so that they can actually turn it around and look at themselves and say, wow, there's so much I didn't know. And maybe that was willfully ignorant of this because the American education system or the Canadian education system purposely left that out. Like they didn't teach us the history of China, right?
Yeah. Very fascinating. And I love that you brought it back around to General So. That's awesome. So to conclude, what games are you playing nowadays, or is there something that you're looking forward to coming out in the upcoming months?
Oh gosh, there are so many. There's
are you enthralled in Tears of the Kingdom like Sid?
No, I don't know. Like I have to admit, I confess, okay, that I gamed all the way through college, but I was a triple major.
There you go.
I was way overclocking.
Word.
I was overclocking all my classes. I was literally taking way more classes than I was statutorily allowed to take.
Wow.
Right, everything. So I was triple majoring. I almost had 4 majors, basically. I had enough credits really by the end of it. But the thing is, I was gaming all the way through. Sort of like, and even after becoming a faculty professor, I haven't stopped. So right now, I can tell you that I'm playing this action martial arts game, role playing game. It's called Shren Yuan Sword 7. And one of the reasons, my motivations for playing it is not just because it's made by a Taiwanese company. It's Taiwanese developers, Taiwanese artists, essentially like that. So it's this one long-running Shren Yuan sword series. I'm playing this one because I want to teach my children that Chinese culture is cool. Okay, because I want my students to grow up. I want my children to grow up bilingual. And they say, why should I learn Chinese? It's not right. But I'm playing this game, and they're watching me play this game. And they're like, oh, it's all in Chinese. All the dialogue's in Chinese. There are English subtitles, right? But I'm playing this game for them, and they can see how beautiful this world is that it was created but in Shren Yuan Sword. So that's one of the things I'm playing, which is that it's just using as a vehicle for teaching language to my kids. And getting them to think of it as cool. Because I remember my interest in Chinese history. Like I said, I didn't start out in history, but when I was a teenager, I played Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which was a long-running historical simulation series about ancient China, essentially, and the civil wars of ancient China. So that got me into Chinese history, essentially. And then I eventually read the books, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and I started to study the poetry of it, everything. So I learned Chinese in college, basically for that purpose, is to better understand it. So I think that, I'm playing Shren Yuan Sword right now. I'm also playing I love the Mass Effect series. So even though I've already beaten it, I don't know, 3 times, essentially, multiple playthroughs with like a Renegade, Paragon, all the different choices.
Yeah.
I just go back sometimes for nostalgia and play it again. So I am currently in a new playthrough of that where I try to set limits for myself. I'll only use certain weapons and I'll make certain choices. And I'm also discovering this game called Planetfall.
That's a Paradox.
Age of Wonders.
4X kind of thing.
Yeah, 4X game, essentially like that. So which mixes it mixes 4x, but essentially, whenever you have battles, instead of auto-resolving like they do with Civilization, it zooms into a little mini tactical battle screen where
nice.
every time you have a battle, then you actually control the individual units and place them in an almost sort of Heroes of Might and Magic style, like, arrangement, and you play it. So like I'm playing that now too. So it is sucking up time. That I don't view as time wasted because it actually makes me a better instructor. Right. In the end, I'm not frittering away the time by playing it. I'm playing it so I can understand design choices that actually I subliminally apply in my own classes too.
Very cool. Sounds very busy.
Oh yeah, I never get enough sleep, and I've been a lifelong insomniac. I'm a total night owl. That was one of the reasons why I guess I read so many books like in my life because I literally couldn't sleep. I was constantly filled with thoughts, and so I'm always reading or writing or playing or doing something. But it's probably not good for my health. Just to not be sleeping regularly. Yeah, because it's taking its toll. Yeah.
Very good. Well, we're really grateful that you were able to join us today.
Yes.
I do want to talk more about Go, but maybe we'll do that offline. Go's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, do you play?
I don't play. I'll explain after. I don't think we need to.
Because I'm happy to teach it here at the game system. If anyone wants,
have like a whole workshop.
I don't know if
session
University of
just for
Waterloo
Go.
has a Go club. I'm not sure if it does.
I don't think
But there's, I mean, like if anyone's interested in playing, I've tried everywhere I've been. I've always tried to teach like people how to play Go. I even went to China in 2008 for research on a Fulbright grant, and I was trying to teach Chinese people there how to play Go. Even though it's invented in China, a lot of Chinese people don't know how to play Go.
Right.
So they call it Wei Qi in China. So so I was teaching them to play Wei Qi or Go. So I'm happy to do that here if you think that there might be some interest.
Let's figure it out. We'll put some feelers out.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a game that anyone can pick up and play, but they say it takes only a day to learn, a day to play, but a lifetime to master.
Right, yeah.
Right, so, yeah.
Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out or ask questions or just find out more about your work?
So I have a faculty profile at the history department.
Okay.
So if you just search for Daria Ho, you'll find me. You may find other things about me that were written under my previous name because I'm transgender. So like it would be under Dapon Ho, Dahpon. But so if you just search for Daria Ho, I have a faculty profile. I believe I should ask the history department administrator to add my contact information to that because it looks like they neglected to do that. But I'm happy to, if anyone wants to email, call, or wherever that. They can also check out my on YouTube.
Yeah,
I posted that documentary film. I should probably also just post an update there because in that documentary film, I was living as a male. I was presenting as male,
right.
And so I look different than I did back then. But I'm the same person. I'm still that person. But I made that film. But that's a guy speaking with a deep voice, right? And it's not me now, right? So, they can find me in those ways. But just daria.ho@uwaterloo.ca, my email address. I'm always happy. If people will want to drop in, office hours and just chat about Asia or the world or gaming or anything like that. Because it's a shame if you have interests and hobbies and passions that are not shared.